to introduce yourself.
No, hello everyone. I truly appreciate you attending this afternoon. My name is Chris Corcoran, and I'm a senior advisor at ABS and the Offshore Business Development Group. However, that said, I'm a shared resource and participated and co-authored the guide that we have for dropped object prevention.
Excellent. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you,
Dimitri.
everyone. I'm Dimitri Strabakis. I work for ABS. I am the Director for Global Vendor Market Strategy, and I've been with ABS about 26 years. Worked with Chris significantly on the Drops Guide and attended several conferences, and we did a lot of research on preventing the guide, so there was a lot of effort put in from all of us, and I was part of the team that helped put our guide together.
So welcome. So Benito was advertised to join as well, and give a bit of perspective from Sapura. I did speak with him yesterday. He was extremely busy with an operational issue they have, so he was not 100% certain whether he could join. So we see right now he's not in yet. Maybe he'll come later. So we're shortly going to go into the presentation, but I'd just like to give you a bit of a background of this. We've recently re-established the Drops Asia Steering Committee after a quiet period of over 2 years. During that period, a lot of good people left our industry or left the region, and we couldn't sustain having the meetings. Even a telephone conference was hard to establish. Now moving forward, obviously oil price is going up nicely, but still we think it's quite unrealistic to have the quarterly drops meetings in the region. People are simply not allowed to travel that much yet. So we've decided that we're going to do online webinars on a more regular basis. It's more accessible to everyone. It doesn't cost you anything, and we will record it so that people who are unable to attend will be able to view the recording later. Now, we've invited today ABS to speak on their Drops program. Now that said, that doesn't mean that we're specifically endorsing a ABS standard. We're very interested in what they do, and so we discuss this among the steering committee. We're very interested to learn, but just because we invited them doesn't mean that we're, as a steering committee, endorsing and say, hey, everyone must go to ABS. I think this session is really to facilitate, let everyone ask questions and figure it out for yourself. So we'll invite Chris and Dimitri to give a short presentation, and then we'll have a session for Q&A where I really hope to see your questions. There is a specific session in the presentation where you can type your question. If you want to elaborate on your question with a microphone, let me know in that question, and then we can give you the floor. Otherwise, we'll just read out your question and answer it. So with that, we're moving to the presentation mode.
Back it up.
And we'll just
there you
back to the beginning. Yeah. I'd like to give the floor to Chris Corcoran. Please welcome Chris.
Joachim. And Joachim, having been with ABS for probably in excess of 25 years over my career, I'll leave the sales pitch to me. since I believe what ABS does, I'd really like everybody to use ABS. But we understand there's different selections out there. Anyway. Just to start off with, I appreciate everybody joining today, and we just have a few short slides, some of which I'll present, some of which that Dimitri will present about the ABS dropped object prevention program. Today, I'm going to use this forum to talk a both about the static and dynamic drops. The ABS guide is currently centered around prevention of static dropped objects, and I recall from Sarah's previous presentation with the Drops Asia group that was the case for Shell anyway. A number of years ago, that static was the primary the primary source of dropped objects, or let's say the majority source. But over time, with the focus that's been put on preventing that they are now looking at a majority of dynamic dropped objects. So I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that development that we're working on next. So today, just to repeat, I'm going to talk, kind of put up a definition as we see it of what static drops are and what dynamic drops are, what our current ABS process is, and what we're working on next for further development of the guide. And I noticed, just a side note, I noticed on LinkedIn that there was a comment made about the posting, after the posting of the videos advertising or really promoting today's webinar, that somebody raised the point of why is it necessary to have ABS produce, or anybody produce a guide on dropped object prevention. And I answered that on LinkedIn. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to see, but essentially in the very beginning, it was ENSCO that asked us if there was something that ABS could do to assist them with their dropped object prevention efforts, because they had taken delivery of some of their new rigs back in the new build cycle that we went through, and they were having a significant high potential incidents. And my first reaction was that I didn't really see a connection with class until I came away from that. We came away from that meeting, and I did a little bit of research into that to determine that indeed the whole concept of dropped object prevention aligns with our mission, which is to promote the security of life, property, and the environment. And that's what moved us down the path to look at developing a guide. And that, coupled with the fact that we didn't really find any consistent standards throughout industry. Yes, Drops Online, Drops has excellent materials for best practices, which we included and used, and were engaged quite a bit with Alan Smith about this process. But as far as management systems and then equipment design considerations, those were two additional items that we added in. So, Joe Kim, is now a good time to ask the question about whether or not each company that's on with us has a formal dropped object prevention program? That's question number 2.
I want to do both questions for 1 and 2.
Yep. Here's the question on the screen now. Sorry. It's open now. Please cast your votes.
All right. Well, from that, I can see that this is fairly the companies who are the folks who are attending the webinar. Their companies have a dropped object prevention program, probably in excess of 85%. Now we've got, now we're at over 90%. So we have a small number that do not have dropped object prevention program. And whether that's, and if it's a need, then there is great guidance out there for doing so. Let's go ahead and ask the question number 3, Joe Kim, about how long.
Right. Please cast your vote.
Okay, I can see that those who have programs are fairly mature. Let's see, we've got now, Joachim, are the results visible to the participants?
Let me do that right now. There you
Okay, so we have of the answers that we have, most companies have had in place. Well, now we're 50-50, at least within the past 5 years, and half have had in place more than 5 years. Now, I do this to demonstrate really that the focus on dropped objects, if we have half of our people have started this within the last 5 years, and I think we have one respondent that their company's just starting this program, is that over the course of the last 4 decades in our industry, safety has matured over time, and now I'd say the focus on dropped objects typically has been within the last 10 years, and more notably within the last 5 to 7 years. So when we talk about static and dynamic drops, our static definition that we use is any object that falls from its previous position under its own weight by gravity and without any outside applied force. An example of that would be a machine guard falls off, say, a top drive during operations. Dynamic drops, a little bit more complex. That's any object that falls from its previous position due to an applied force. For example, a collision involving traveling equipment in a derrick, or a collision of loads with structure. Now, on this slide here, I'm going to turn this over to Dimitri, because this slide here kind of shows what we're doing today and what's the content of the guide. And we'll, Dimitri, you want to go ahead and take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you for everyone. Thank you, everyone. We started looking at some of the major issues that were occurring in the field and some of the feedback. It always stemmed back from a lot of the operators at what's being done about equipment. You know, are the designs of the equipment being improved, and how do we incorporate that or make it an item to kind of persuade a lot of the vendors to start looking at better designs. So as a result of it, and working with some major drilling equipment manufacturers and other OEMs, we started to work out a methodology where we're adapting what's called inherently safer design of the equipment. That effectively looks at reducing the number of parts that could be come apart or come loose and create a falling object incident, and then working on better methods of securing and other types of arrangements. And we've had some good success. Chris and I have traveled many trade shows, most recently OTC, and met with a lot of the supply chain, the equipment manufacturers, and had quite a few already jump on board with trying to add pedigree to their equipment that will make it an item that is selectable for what's called a DOPP or DOPP plus notation. For ABS, the plus notation infers that there is a higher level of design applied to the equipment, which meets our guide requirements and enables that higher notation to be achieved. Of course, we offer it both the DOPP with existing vessels, but the notation comes on new vessels or vessels owners trying to achieve a higher level of safety. It starts with the requirement to add it into the supply chain process. So if you can look at the tables, and I think there's a pointer here somewhere. If you can look at the tables, it starts in the first column where we look at the manuals and then we identify certified equipment and some supplemental training. And the red indicates where the supply chain needs to address the issue of what type of pedigree is needed to enter that equipment into the register or the DOPP register, which is part of the process for getting the notation. Then we do our reviews. ABS has supplied certified equipment lists. So the process by which we go through the approvals is one where we do an engineering design review and a risk assessment on the parts itself. And then we typically provide a type approval on that equipment, which indicates how to do the installations, what kind of service restrictions are on it, and then from there it should be an item that could be directly selected from our type approval list and entered into the register at a later date. We go through our initial inspection, which is usually done by an external specialist firm. We had a couple companies already signed up. I believe OES and some others already have some approvals from us. Those specialists go through the vessel and provide the reports and provide the initial reporting on the initial installation. And then it becomes a matter of how that is maintained by the operator. The surveyor does a verification, and we do an annual check on it as well, together with the specialist. And of course, there's onboard maintenance. Again, using specialist firms. It could be the company itself. So the operator themselves could theoretically become a specialist firm as well. And if there are issues or problems, the corrective actions are taken. And then we go back and do periodic verification, both during annual examinations and through specialist firms and the surveyors. Throughout this process, the equipment, whether it's installed initially or replaced, should come from should have the DOPP plus compliance to achieve that higher notation, or it should be an item that's suitably installed and properly secured as per the guide. So once again.
Sure, I can do that, but what I'd like to do is ask a few questions. Thanks, Dimitri. Ask a few questions. Joachim, maybe question number 4 on the list, which is which type of dropped object?
That's the main corridor.
Okay, that's apparently all right. Oh, no, okay, here we go.
Manufacturers to attain their pedigree for the equipment for DOPP plus compliance. Chris?
All right, from the responses that are coming in on that, I'm seeing that that there are a number of companies that are experiencing actually higher dynamic type of dropped objects, and that this is significant. And I appreciate the answers because this is significant. That in the history of, say, best practices has been targeting static drops. Our guide was written around best practices, and like I said, and Dimitri talked about, adding in components of external specialist certifications as well as equipment certifications. But a management system is the same whether it's a dynamic drop system or whether it's trying to prevent dynamic drops or static drops. And that is already included in our manual. Okay, I see here that it's about static drops, we're looking at less than 20%, and dynamic drops is more like 37 to 40%. So that's a significant difference. I'm looking at those companies that are seeing a lot more dynamic drop incidents. They have essentially twice as many as they do static drops. Okay, let's go on to the next question, Joachim. Let me see. That was okay. That was 5 years ago. Let's look at the question about today. 5 years ago. Okay, we had today's question was the last one. Let's do the one about 5 years ago. For those of you who have been with your companies or know what your statistics are over the past, well, since you initiated your dropped object prevention program. So far, the responses are correlating to Sarah's presentation that she gave. Was that about a month ago, Joe Kim?
Yeah, about
That you
there,
had
yeah.
that presentation from Sarah? Okay. This is paralleling exactly what Sarah was talking about. I see that the answers here, close to 70% of the high potential incidents were experienced 5 years ago were static type drops. So you can see that we're swapping over to a dynamic attention. We need to pay more attention to dynamic drops. We've done a great job at focusing on static drops, and our guide kind of is a one-stop shop for a complete program in that regard. Now, so I'll go on to the next slide, which has to do with where we're trying to go with this. Dynamic drops is a much more complex subject, and although it's a little bit difficult for me to see this slide, Joe Kim, I'll do my best to say where we're going with this. I'm sorry. The dynamic drops involves a great deal of risk assessment. We're talking about equipment either running into other equipment or handling of loads and not being successful at handling loads and handling tubulars. And we see a great deal of these issues take place especially on drilling units where we've got a lot of equipment that's interacting with each other. So on the dynamic drop side, this is the part that's under development, and this is a part which I would like to engage with this group in the development of that and share the development process and get feedback from you on this, because we use this the risk assessment techniques in our guide for the classification of drilling systems. And it's the same and a very similar approach that we would take for dropped object prevention, where a hazard is carried out, maybe even the FMEAs on particular pieces of equipment, depending on their criticality. But it's a whole process that we would see would need to be applied to an installation, demonstrating the layout of the equipment, the functional layout of the equipment, the 3D operating envelope of the equipment. Now, when it comes to handling tubulars and handling loads, that would be something that would be subject to risk assessment as well, depending on the situation. But we also have a certification process for the equipment that's used for that purpose. The one thing that we are focusing on here, as you'll note, is the equipment and not so much of the personnel aspects associated with these. I asked the question in a number of presentations that I've given is that we don't have here, but the question is, do you believe that we can create an inherently safe employee, an inherently safe person? When I ask that question, a lot of times I get a few laughs, and then some people think about it seriously. Well, the answer that I see is no. I mean, we can try, and we do try through training, skills assessments, competency assessments, to drive our employee to a level of inherently safe. But as long as there's a human in the picture, we're going to have to do our best to work around that, if you will, when it comes to preventing dynamic drops. And when we talk about humans in the equation, I'm not just talking about humans on the drill floor, for instance, or that are handling the pipe or the loads. I'm talking about the designers of the equipment, the people who carry out the risk assessments. It can be subjective, and I think we need to pay closer attention to this process if we're going to reduce our dynamic drop incidents. And I think that's about, Joe Kim, I think that's about all I have. Just in summary, as demonstrated in our questions, the static dropped object prevention focus is proving to be successful, and I think that's a great thing. Equipment design is something that hasn't been considered over the past, at least a lot of attention given to dropped object prevention. But we have a section now that provides that certification process and design review process for that. Dynamic drops is more complex, like I was saying, and there aren't any current best practices on that. And that's where we want to go, is we want to try to develop something which leads us to a better practice. Dynamic drops moves this discussion to inherently safe. This is where we're trying to go with equipment in general. One of the questions that ENSCO asked us when we started this process was, how can you deliver us an inherently safe piece of equipment? Okay, it was kind of off the cuff from one of their very senior project fellows, but he had a point. He said, all I want to do is be able to buy an inherently safe piece of equipment. Well, it's easy to say, and it's a process to get there. And the first part of that process that we did was on static drops, at least focusing on drops. The second part has to do with the dynamic drops. And in their case, they also wanted to have an inherently safe employee, but I'm not sure I can help them too much with that. And just also a side note here, IEDC has a committee that recently developed the manufacturer's record book standard. I attended one of their meetings recently to talk to them about some of this efforts that we're doing here with drops prevention. And after some discussion, it looked like some of these items may be appropriately included in a service manual rather than a manufacturer's record book, or in both. But it looks like they're going to consider a standard for a service manual, which could be a very good thing and contribute more toward safety and preventing dropped objects. So that draws my presentation to a close, and that just really open for any open discussion. Joe Kim.
Excellent.
Dimitri, go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris and Dimitri. So we'll move into the Q&A section of the webinar now. In the middle of the screen, there's an option to answer your question. Just type it out. If you prefer to do it via phone, and let me know. Then raise your hand. There's a little button at the top of the screen. If you click it, then you can raise your hand, and I can give you the microphone. Now I had prepared a question, but then
Dimitri, I'll add in.
oh, good. We have a first
another
question.
aspect of his question
Hi, do you offer any
is,
training
do
or
we
online
provide
training to
individual training
become
for an inspector? And the answer to that is
competent
no,
job
we're not set
survey
up for that.
inspector on board
That would
vessels,
be within
especially
a
working
particular
for oil and
company
gas?
to do that.
Let me, I could probably take that. I guess is that how do you
Go ahead.
become an external specialist to perform dropped objects? I guess is the question. Yes, we have a methodology that's applied for firms that are looking to prepare and provide that service. Again, the service for the external specialist
Can you hear me now?
is to support and maintain the DOPP plus
Hey guys,
notation
thanks
or
for
the
participating.
DOPP notation on board.
Try
So we
can
can
you-
work, if you have a
Can you hear
firm
me
that's
now?
interested in becoming a specialist firm, or if you're an operator who also wants to
Guys,
get the
thanks
approvals
for
for
today.
it,
previous
we
question.
can work with you, and
Thank
we
you.
have a process for how that is carried out,
Like
training for
jobs,
people and
inspector training
specific
available
requirements for
online.
reporting of
I
that
just
firm.
wanted to add on to the previous question. I mean,
That
they are
Jackins
they
currently
are
working on a unit
jobs
for
of
jobs
inspector training available around Asia.
use
You
that.
know, so they speak English.
So just commenting
I know that
on the last question. My
that
question
you
is,
understand
you
the unit.
okay?
Also, I think
How's that?
Drops Online has, both Chris and I took the courses with
My
Drops Online as
question
well,
for you
which
guys.
gave a very good idea of,
I did hear that
inspection
there is
How
training.
closely are you guys working with
So, there's
vendors
courses already out there. We don't
such
offer
as
that.
My
NOV,
question for you guys,
Cameron,
Excellent.
and Hydro?
how closely are you guys
Benito
working
just raised his
to
hand.
attack
He
the
manages to
design
dial in with his
design
mobile. I'm not sure, Benito,
section
is your
of
microphone working? Can we hear you?
to attack the design, equipment design
Yeah, we can hear you, Benito.
section of jobs?
Dimitri, you want to take that one? The question, the question was, are we working with the manufacturers like NOV, Cameron, etc., on the design aspects to prevent dropped objects?
I'm having a little trouble hearing them.
Benito, we can't hear you clearly.
I think Benito, to supplement that, Benito, we have, since we published the guide in October, we've been engaged with Shell on an FPSO in the Gulf of Mexico, and more recently we have two requests for class of 2 jackup rigs in the Middle East that will apply the DOPP plus notation, and we're working closely right now with NOV on
I didn't hear the
their
full
package
question.
of equipment
Can somebody repeat it?
that may be going to those rigs. Aside from that, the getting the manufacturers to come on board to meet a drops plus requirement
Yes, we have.
starts
We've been
with the buyer.
extensively working
So
with them,
one of the
advising
questions
them.
that I
there's
had,
several initiatives
and
already
Joe
in
Kim, you
play
might want
for
to put that one up there now, has to
attaining the
do
pedigree on the
with your
equipment
company's
list
supply
for drilling
chain.
equipment, especially for this.
Essentially,
So there's been quite a
if
bit
you
of
have
effort,
it in your
and
supply
we
chain,
hope in the very near future to have quite a significant list of
if you
items
have it in
that
your
will
supply
be
chain to
compliant
purchase equipment
with our drop
with a drops resistant certification,
Right.
and I only know of ABS offering that right now, that will drive the manufacturer to comply with that request. And So right now, through the project, the new build project that we have for the two jackups,
Yeah,
the potential suppliers of that equipment are coming to us for guidance on that certification process. Okay, so we have. Very, very true. Very true. Oh no, Anton.
Attain the pedigree. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Anton.
There's been some proactive companies also prior to that also seeking it before the aero projects came around as well.
Okay, so the next question, okay, is from Anton. Maybe not fair question to you. Do you know what DMV is doing related to the subject? Personally, I don't know. And if you don't want to answer that, fair. But if you do, go ahead.
I know they've got something in the works. They've got something in the works that they're trying to put together. But and I know Lloyd's also has a one pager. I think when Chris and I attended North American Forum, there were representatives there, so they're trying to move ahead with something. But I think it's not as advanced as ours.
Okay, so yeah, again, I don't know about the DMV. I know that LR has quite a program as well. It's just not as well published, but you can find it on the call. Is Attange. You can reach out to him if you want to know more. So the next question: can a group within a company get recognized as an external specialist?
I'm gonna take that one. So yes, there's got to be some separation between the main company and the servicing arm of that company. But absolutely, it's got to be a separate department. So, for instance, a rig can't have its own staff on the rig be the recognized specialist. Mostly because we look at the training and quality of the people. There's got to be a quality process on how they carry it out. So there's some defined items that have to be verified, and typically there's some segregation between the operations side of the company and the department that does the inspection separately from that operations side. So we keep them segregated, mostly because they have to provide reports, and and they have to be accurate.
All right. Thanks. So the next question from Lucas.
And
As
on
a
that
first, we
point,
need to
we're
establish
open for
defined criteria
suggestions
against we are
if the
going to inspect
frequency of an
equipment.
external
Not
specialist
exactly a question. I
is
think, Lucas, I've given
say,
you the microphone.
too
Do you
narrow
want to
on an annual
elaborate on
basis.
that?
We'd like to hear back from the community.
Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next question. Hu Jin, what is the frequency of third-party independent drop survey? Is it 3 years or 5 years? Shell requires every 5 years for independent survey. What's the requirement from ABS?
no,
There's an initial survey. for installation and documenting and preparing the register initially, and then subsequent to that, there's obviously an annual verification from the specialist firm, and then we also do a confirmatory survey from the surveyor who attends the vessel on an ABS class vessel as well. And then it renews every 5 years.
During that period, we're doing 6 monthly and annual
LGI
LGIs.
inspection
Okay.
company would be looking at our jobs.
And at the same time, the LGI inspection company would be looking at our jobs.
Okay, so Benito, you have the external specialist biannually. Is that what you're saying?
Biannually, they come for
Yep.
Lola.
Okay.
For our intent,
Yep,
for the notation that was
Lola
provided,
For Lola,
a lot of the services that we wanted was basically
Lola
support that
equipment coming out
the
to
maintenance of that notation as well, which is
look
why
at
we
our-
established
and
the
index
basis for the frequency.
Okay. Well, we'll take that under
and
under
in
consideration.
jobs aspects, if we open it up
they
Okay.
would
to
look at
a bigger,
the job
Benito has another question.
We open it up to a bigger
Okay. Yeah.
inspection areas.
So the perfect combination that I would see is where you had your own internal team that was external specialist certified, and then the biannual from a third party would actually be an audit of your process as well.
So I mean, a lot of the drillers on the conference call.
So I mean, a lot of the drillers on the conference call, there is requirement for them to do LGIs every 6 months.
Appetite for
1 year.
opening the
It's just
scope and for them
appetite
to do
for
a drops inspection on
opening
on
the
the
scope
base of it.
for them to do a
And to be
drops
honest, it
inspection
does go hand
on
in
the rest
hand,
of
right?
it. And to be honest, it does go hand in hand, right?
Yes. And I think when we talk about also working toward dynamic drops prevention, this brings into the discussion barrier management, and essentially the risk assessments will drop out the barriers that are required to prevent the the dynamic drops, and that'll be a life cycle approach as well for barrier management.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doug, I agree.
Okay. So, Joachim, I want to highlight. Yeah, if there is there another question?
Yeah, from Mark.
Okay.
Yes. So, what indicates that the is 2-year third parties and there's a statutory
Yeah. Hmm.
And then, to be honest, you guys said that should be done after anything. I completely agree. When there's a major overhaul, you swap out equipment, things change, and things change, and look at what the conditions might exist to mitigate risk. So,
Okay. Next question.
Yeah, from Mark.
And we do have
Yes. Yeah.
provisions for handling temporary
So,
equipment, and also
Mark indicates that
installing
in
new
Oman,
equipment and maintaining that in the
2-year
register.
third-party survey here in
So
Oman.
there's
So there's
that's
some
part of the
statutory
management
or
process.
local port or
But
local
when it comes
flag
to a
state
major
requirements
equipment
that have to
change
be built into
or a
the plan,
modification, that's when initial
we can
survey
adjust to
should be
that
redone.
accordingly to meet any regulatory requirements also. But right now we're looking at it from a class rotation requirement. And then to be honest, again says to be honest, it should be done after any major changes in equipment as well. Completely agree with that. When there's a major overhaul and you swap out equipment, things change. and as they change, you need to adapt and look at what new conditions might exist to mitigate risk. So again, putting it on a schedule is again related to maintaining the notation that we're offering on it. But obviously, if there are changes like that, it should be done more frequently to make sure you're still compliant. Yeah, very good.
I did, yes.
There's a point from Mark. I don't see why anyone would want frequency of third-party surveys any more than 2 years. Yeah. Okay, Lucas, the way how we are going to mitigate risk after modification installation shall be done in accordance with OEM. Yeah, so I guess when you install equipment that requires inspection anyway. Okay.
Does rig owner realize that integrating him, he becomes the owner of a new machine?
The elements contained in the guide are applicable across many industries.
Okay, next question. Do you
and,
see this
can be
class
used as
or
such
guidance
when
to be extended
initially,
to the marine industry or even
thought about
industries
writing the guide,
like
we
harbor
realized it
cranes,
covered both
etc.?
maritime and offshore. It's
Chris,
just that the
Chris and I got
technology group
requests
that
from
developed it was
various other
focused on
industries. I think you
offshore.
got one from nuclear
But that
plant, right,
doesn't limit
Chris?
its
And
use.
we've had requests for shipyards to adapt the policy as well. Again, the concepts and the items that we put into the guide could be applicable to other areas, obviously, but we don't offer a notation to a shipyard. So again, the intent was for a notation that comes with it, but it is a set of good practices and pedigree for equipment that's used. So it could be applied, but our intent was mostly to focus on vessels that'll be attaining our notation. And I believe we did have talks about it could be applied to other types of vessels as well. But primarily our focus was offshore, drilling equipment. Yeah. Also, onshore rigs, things like that is another area. We had thoughts of applying it as well.
Okay. I think Timariga Ruben has raised his hand. I'm not sure if we can hear you through the audience, Mr. Ruben. Could you ask your question? Yeah, I think that's not coming through. Right. So you mentioned you're going to certify equipment providers. Do you have like a database? So if I'm a procurement, then I need to order some equipment. Is there some way I can verify that, this equipment, if it needs to be installed at height, that it is certified by
Yes,
ABS?
I can answer that question. We do the equipment approvals through our type approval program. So the way to look for the equipment that has the pedigree would be go onto our type approval database and look up the type of equipment, and you can put a keyword search for instance, drops compliant or GPP compliant in there, and it should provide the list of equipment that's approved. So, for instance, let's say
Yeah.
you're looking for netting or some type of lighting fixtures or other items like that to add to your register. You would go in, type in lights or alarms, and then put in DOPP Plus compliant in our type approval database.
Dimitri, if a company has a question on what it takes and how to do this, do they contact you?
Pull the certificate and then use that for documentation in your register.
Okay.
Right. So
you mentioned the
what
netting.
it is, we had one company. I think it was DropSafe.
What would be involved for a company to get their product certified? You mentioned there's this certification process.
I guess my question is what kind of
they need to
drops
reach out
are
to
they
you?
experiencing, and whether they're dynamic or static. And the reason I ask that is because the external specialists and people that do inspection are largely looking for preventing static drops. Like I say, the dynamic drop side is a whole lot more complex subject, and I think that once we achieve a good practice for preventing that,
yes,
that
I'd be
we'll
very happy to answer
get
any
to the
questions.
point where
and also,
an effective drop survey will be effective for an extended period of time. That coupled with equipment certification. And that's the point. I think that if I was to raise one point during this webinar, is to encourage everyone to take a look at their supply chain, because this is where the improvement's going to start when it comes to equipment improvements.
So a question from Duncan in Australia. Diamond Offshore have an annual requirement for independent drop survey, and we're still experiencing drops in the fleet. So can you ever have too many surveys?
Major equipment manufacturer to provide equipment that meets a drop standard like ABS. That will go a long way in advancing this whole process of preventing dropped objects.
It'll put a drop.
It'll put a drive into the OEMs to start looking for that pedigree in their equipment, for sure.
So the question from Ruben. My question is, what's your approach to establish these standards in West Africa and Nigeria? You've been practiced. You have these been practiced, but your presence here is not really strong. I guess it goes both for drops. I'm not sure about the presence of ABS in Nigeria and West Africa in general. From a drops perspective, I can only say, drops is all based on volunteers, and usually that's driven locally. And if we can help out, get it started in.
We have a main office in Lagos, and obviously we're in other places too that we operate. I think
in
it's
Africa,
more of an
we'd
education,
be happy to help.
And then it depends on the operators themselves that are running the platforms out there. So it
companies
would
like ABS
definitely
who have a
assist
global
by perhaps providing some local seminars to agencies and to interested
presence, I'm
stakeholders,
sure, would
and
be
then
willing to
working
help
with
out.
whoever the
In
operators
terms of
are in
your
the area
presence
to help support it. I know
in West
there's a couple of
Africa,
operators that are
Dimitri,
there that are already looking at these programs. Their contract with
what's the presence of
either
ABS in
Ocean
that
Rig
region?
and Sea Drill and others that are already there. Transocean are there, so they're probably looking at this already. And obviously, any moves to help that they need help on, we can definitely assist with providing our requirements and our suggestions.
Oh, sure, Joe Kim. And by the way, I want to add that I think this forum is working perfectly. The technology you've got that you chose is functioning very, very well. And actually, I'm pretty impressed. Since since classes, the DOPP class is optional. That's not a mandatory part of classification. We can't drive a requirement into reactivations, but it is a critical concern.
Yep. So we're coming close to the end of this webinar. There's a few questions still outstanding, which we'll try to address afterwards. But I do want to raise a few points regarding drops Asia before some of you log out. The Drops Asia Steering Committee has recently met. Really good participation from major operators like Shell, Sapura. I'm not going to try to name them all because I'm bound to miss one and then make someone upset. But really good participation from many companies. We'd like to do these webinars on a regular basis. We had one from Shell, now with ABS. Please do reach out to me if you have any ideas that you want to contribute to this to the webinar. Please reach out to me.
On our own.
So thanks all for joining. We'll continue to try to answer the questions until
preventing
for a while.
Drops, whether it be static
until
or
I think
dynamic.
we have to be wary. Dimitri and Chris are in the US and they're up in the
focus
middle
on
of
the
the
problem,
night, so
you're
I won't
gonna-
keep it
you're
too
going
long.
to do
But
something
perhaps
about
we
the
can
problem.
still answer a few
And
questions.
one of the problems that kicks in here
start
is
from
buying
scratch
bits and
and
pieces
get
and
everything
doing
up
it
and running,
ourselves.
and then,
Because as you know, as a
but right
contract
now,
driller,
I believe
anything you can do,
we
we
have
can do
interest
better.
in it.
And
To my
consequently,
knowledge,
if we
it's
focus on
something
the
being looked
problem,
at.
we're at least going to make
So,
progress.
so we would say yes.
Yeah. Thanks. It's been a painful learning experience last year, but I think we got it now. But still plenty of room for improvement. Okay, let's see. Any more questions? I see Alex. Any trends being seen in drops inspections on cold stacked rigs being brought back into service?
I'm sorry.
Great. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we hear lots of stories, and also through the IADC, the reactivation has been a major topic. But yeah, clear statistics has been difficult to obtain regarding drops. But yeah, it's very important to address during reactivation. There's a point from Anton
I just want to
with
say that,
NOV.
I'd
The
like
risk of
to
dynamic drops is increasing. If the rig
more
owner
engaged
buys
with
its
Anton on his
bits and
concern on
pieces
this,
and being put together,
say
what was
outside of this
also
webinar,
that concern from my
because
last question.
we have a
Okay.
good
Yeah.
engagement with Anton. NLV's
It's
been
true.
very supportive
No
of
proper
development
planning.
of the guide and has provided quite a bit of good material that we've included. And so this is a step beyond, and I think that I'd like to take it offline with Anton and get engaged a little bit more on this subject.
So I guess the question is if they make modifications to the equipment. A lot of activity on the equipment level. Does rig owner realize that when integrating equipment, he becomes the owner of a complete new machine, and should ABS make them aware? Well, obviously, if the machinery that's put on there and the equipment that's put on there, the maintenance of that equipment and how it gets put into service, and especially in a drop service, should be part of the onboard maintenance
Right.
plan. And then any modifications
I
or
see one
changes or
question
maintenance on
left in
that
my
should follow
question
the
screen,
OEM's
and I'm not sure if we had
specifications and
attended already.
requirements.
I hear
Chris
and see a
previously
lot of
did talk
activity on
about
equipment level.
manuals
Does the rig owner realize when
and
integrating
on board,
equipment
which need to
he
be
becomes the
followed,
owner of a
and also
complete new
our
machine?
type approval
And should
process has restrictions and service
ABS
policies on how it needs to
OEM
be
make them
maintained.
aware?
So, yeah, they
Sorry,
are
did
the
we
owners
cover
of
this,
it, and
Chris,
they
Dimitri?
should maintain it according to what the OEM requires them to do, and they should be following their own maintenance plans on board for drops items to be able to maintain that notation properly. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Operation.
Yes.
We have a presence in the Persian Gulf, but we don't service Iran. Iraq, we do anything offshore, which is within the area that we're allowed to operate in. It would be something we could service. Most of that would be handled out of our Dubai office.
But we would never
close the area. But
And I
we
would
do
like to
provide
get them
service.
online again in
But we
a
would never
future
take bits and
future
pieces and
webinar,
put it together
hopefully,
ourselves.
to get
So
their
we have another
perspectives
area that we
on this as
service.
well. Um, right, we have an